The dust kicked up around Nora Garrett's worn boots as she dismounted from the borrowed mule, her eyes scanning the weathered ranch house that sat like a lonely sentinel against the vast Texas sky in the summer of 1884. She had traveled 3 days from Pecos with nothing but a canvas bag of belongings and a heart full of desperation, hoping against hope that someone here might need an extra pair of hands willing to work for room and board. The ranch spread before her looked modest but well-maintained, with corrals holding a dozen horses and cattle dotting the distant hills. A man stood near the barn, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sun as he hammered something into place. Nora took a deep breath, smoothed her dusty skirt, and approached with as much confidence as she could muster despite her empty stomach and aching feet. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice cracking slightly from thirst. The man turned, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, perhaps around 30 years old. Dark hair fell across his forehead beneath his hat, and his eyes were a striking blue that seemed to assess her in a single glance. He set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his denim pants. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep, cautious, but not unkind. Nora straightened her spine, determined not to show weakness even though her knees felt like they might buckle. "My name is Nora Garrett. I came from Pecos looking for work. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals, and I am not afraid of hard labor. I do not require much pay, just a place to sleep and meals." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her thin frame, the dark circles under her green eyes, and the determination set in her jaw. "I am Seth Randall. This is my ranch, such as it is." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I could use the company." Relief flooded through Nora so powerfully that she swayed slightly. Seth stepped forward, his hand reaching out to steady her elbow. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," she admitted, her pride warring with her need. "Come on to the house then. We can talk details after you have got some food in you." His grip was firm but gentle as he guided her toward the ranch house. "You can put your mule in the corral. There is water in the trough." Nora nodded gratefully and led the mule to the corral, her hands shaking slightly as she removed the simple bridle. The animal immediately went for the water, and she felt a pang of guilt that she had not thought to stop and let it drink during their journey today. Seth waited on the porch, holding the door open. The interior of the house was sparse but clean, with simple wooden furniture and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. A kitchen area occupied the back corner, and Nora could see 2 doors that likely led to bedrooms. "Sit," Seth instructed, gesturing to a chair at the wooden table. He moved to the stove, stoking the fire that still glowed from his morning cooking. Within minutes, he had sliced bread, laid out cold beef from the previous night's dinner, and poured her a cup of water from a pitcher. Nora wanted to fall upon the food like a starving animal, but she forced herself to eat slowly, maintaining what dignity she could. Seth sat across from her, watching her with those penetrating blue eyes. "So you came all the way from Pecos looking for ranch work?" he asked after she had eaten half the bread. "That is unusual for a woman." Nora swallowed carefully before answering. "My father died 6 months ago. Fever took him fast. We had a small homestead outside of Pecos, but without him, I could not manage it alone. The bank took it for unpaid debts 3 weeks ago. I have been staying with a family in town, helping with their children, but they have fallen on hard times themselves and cannot afford to keep me anymore. No other family, no husband. My mother died when I was 12. I am 21 now and no husband. Never seemed to be the right time or the right man." She met his eyes directly, refusing to be ashamed of her circumstances. Seth nodded slowly. I will be honest with you, Miss Garrett. I have been running this place alone for 2 years since my brother moved to California. It is hard work, and the house has suffered from my inattention. I can pay you $15 a month plus room and board if you are willing to handle the cooking, cleaning, and mending. I would also appreciate help with the chickens and the garden, which I have been neglecting. The heavier ranch work I will continue to manage myself. That is more than fair, Nora said quickly, hardly believing her good fortune. When would you like me to start? You already have, Seth said, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been a smile. There is a spare room off the kitchen. It is small but private, with a bed and a chest for your things. You can settle in today, rest up, and start fresh tomorrow morning. Nora felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back fiercely. Thank you, Mr. Randall. You will not regret this. Call me Seth. We will be living under the same roof, no need for such formality. He stood, carrying his hat in his hands. I will be out checking the fence lines until dark. Make yourself at home, and there is more food if you are still hungry. After he left, Nora allowed herself a moment to simply sit and absorb the sudden change in her fortunes. She had been preparing herself for another rejection, another night of uncertainty. Instead, she had found work, shelter, and an employer who seemed decent, if somewhat reserved. She explored her new room, which was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt and a window that looked out toward the eastern pastures. After unpacking her few belongings, she returned to the kitchen and began taking stock of the supplies, planning meals in her head and noting what needed to be replenished. The house was dusty, she noticed, with cobwebs in the corners and windows that had not been properly cleaned in months. The stove was serviceable but needed a good scrubbing, and the floor could use a thorough mopping. But these were tasks she knew how to do, work that made sense and had visible results. For the first time in weeks, Nora felt a sense of purpose settling over her. She spent the remainder of the afternoon cleaning the kitchen and preparing a proper dinner. There were potatoes in a bin, onions hanging in a cool corner, and she found salt pork that could be fried up with the vegetables. She made biscuits from the flour and lard, her hands remembering the rhythm her mother had taught her years ago. When Seth returned as the sun was setting, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the transformation. The kitchen gleamed, the table was set with clean plates, and the smell of home cooking filled the air. I hope you do not mind that I went ahead and cleaned while I cooked, Nora said, suddenly worried she had overstepped. Mind. This house has not looked this good or smelled this inviting since my mother passed 5 years ago. Seth removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. I will wash up. They ate together as twilight deepened outside, the meal punctuated by the sounds of forks on plates and the occasional comment about the ranch. Seth told her about his cattle, about the challenges of managing everything alone, about his hopes to expand the herd next spring. Your brother, does he ever visit? Nora asked, gathering the plates after they finished. Samuel went to California to try his luck in business. He sends letters occasionally, seems to be doing well enough. He was never suited to ranch life, not really. Too restless. Seth's voice held no resentment, just simple acceptance. We parted on good terms. He offered to stay and help, but I could see his heart was already gone. And your heart is here. Seth looked around the room, his gaze distant. I was born in this house. My father built it with his own hands, cleared this land, started the herd from nothing. When he died, he left it to both of us, but we both knew I would be the one to stay. This land is in my blood. I cannot imagine being anywhere else. Nora understood that kind of connection to place. She had felt it for her family's small homestead, which made losing it all the more painful. You are fortunate to still have your home. I know it, Seth stood, stretching his tall frame. "I will be up before dawn tomorrow. I usually make coffee and have some bread, nothing fancy." "I will make breakfast," Nora said firmly. "That is part of my job now. What time should I have it ready?" 5:30. He looked almost embarrassed to ask for such an early meal. "Then I will be up at 5. Nora smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face after weeks of worry. "Good night, Seth." "Good night, Nora." In her small room, Nora lay in the narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Horses whinnied softly in the corral, cattle lowed in the distance, and the wind whispered through the eaves of the house. For the first time since her father died, she felt safe. She fell asleep with that thought warming her like a blanket. True to her word, Nora was up at 5 the next morning, stoking the stove and preparing a breakfast of eggs from the chickens she had heard but not yet seen, more biscuits and strong coffee. Seth emerged from his room looking surprised to find everything ready, the table set, and Nora dressed and alert despite the early hour. "You are a woman of your word," he said, accepting the cup of coffee she poured for him. "Always," Nora replied. Over breakfast, Seth explained the layout of the ranch more thoroughly. The chicken coop was behind the house, currently home to a dozen hens and one rooster. The garden, which he admitted with some chagrin was more weeds than vegetables at this point, was on the south side where it got the most sun. The barn held feed, tools, and a workshop area where he did repairs. The well was between the house and the barn, with good clear water. "I need to ride out to the north pasture today and move some cattle," Seth explained. "I will likely be gone most of the day. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course. I will tackle that garden and see what can be saved." Nora had already mentally rolled up her sleeves. After Seth rode out, Nora spent the morning exploring her new domain more thoroughly. The chickens were friendly enough, clearly accustomed to being fed regularly even if their coop could use some cleaning. She collected eggs, marveling at their warmth in her hands, and scattered feed for the birds. The garden was indeed in sorry shape, but Nora had helped her father with their vegetable patch for years and knew what to do. She found tools in the barn and spent hours pulling weeds, identifying what plants could still be saved, and making mental notes of what should be planted next season. The work was hot and exhausting, but satisfying in a way that made her heart feel lighter. By the time Seth returned that evening, dusty and tired, Nora had done a full day's work. The garden showed marked improvement, the chicken coop was clean, and another good dinner waited on the table. She had even found time to wash the windows, letting more light into the house. "You are going to make me look bad," Seth said, but his eyes held genuine appreciation. "I have been letting this place fall apart around me." "You have been doing the work of 2 men, Nora pointed out, ladling stew into a bowl for him. "No one could manage everything alone." They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Nora rose early, made breakfast, and spent her days transforming the homestead while Seth worked the ranch. In the evenings, they shared meals and gradually began to share conversation as well, moving from polite small talk to more genuine exchanges. Nora learned that Seth was 29, that he had once hoped to marry but the woman he loved had chosen a man with better prospects, and that he read voraciously whenever he had the time, ordering books from catalogs that he kept in a wooden crate beside his bed. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed, and that he was unfailingly kind to his animals, treating them with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. Seth learned that Nora had been educated by her mother, who had been a schoolteacher before marriage, and that she could read and write better than most men he knew. He found out she had a singing voice that emerged when she thought she was alone, sweet and clear as she worked in the garden or kneaded bread in the kitchen. He noticed how she never complained about the work, even when he knew her hands must be blistered or her back must ache. One evening in late August, about 6 weeks after Nora's arrival, Seth came in from the barn carrying something wrapped in burlap. Nora was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its pins in damp tendrils around her face. "I went into Pico's today to sell some cattle," Seth said, setting the bundle on the table. "I thought you might need some things." Nora dried her hands and approached cautiously. Inside the burlap, she found fabric, 2 lengths of good cotton in deep blue and sage green, along with thread, needles, and a package of hairpins. "Seth, this is too much," she protested, even as her fingers caressed the fabric longingly. Her 2 dresses were becoming worn from constant washing and work. "You work hard. You deserve more than one dress that is not falling apart," Seth said gruffly, looking embarrassed. "Besides, I got a good price for the cattle. Consider it a bonus." Nora felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you. This is very kind. You have earned it 10 times over." Seth shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "There is something else. There is a dance in Pico's next Saturday. The town puts one on every few months. Whole community comes. I thought maybe you would like to go, get away from the ranch for an evening, see some other faces." Nora's heart beat faster. "Would you be going as well?" "Well, yes, I would take you. Bring you back after, if you wanted to go, that is." He was not quite meeting her eyes, and Nora realized with a start that he was nervous. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Seth's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. That is good. We can leave around 5, make it there by 7 when things get started." The week, until the dance, seemed to drag and fly simultaneously. Nora worked on sewing herself a new dress from the blue fabric, sitting by lamplight in the evenings while Seth read from his books. Sometimes he would read passages aloud, and she would pause in her sewing to listen to his deep voice bringing the words to life. She found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that went beyond simple gratitude for employment. The way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he lifted something heavy. The rare smile that transformed his serious face. The gentleness in his calloused hands when he examined an injured calf or handed her something across the table. These thoughts made her nervous because she could not afford to develop feelings for her employer. The arrangement they had was perfect as it was, and any complication could ruin everything. She told herself firmly that she was simply appreciating a good man, nothing more. But when Saturday arrived and she put on the new blue dress, taking extra care with her hair and pinching her cheeks for color, she knew she was lying to herself. The look in Seth's eyes when she emerged from her room told her he was not immune either. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his voice rough. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." And he did, in a white shirt she had pressed for him and his best vest, his hair still damp from washing. The ride to Pico's was pleasant in the cooling evening air. They took Seth's wagon, and Nora sat beside him on the bench seat, acutely aware of his presence beside her. They talked about small things, comfortable in each other's company in a way that felt both natural and charged with something unspoken. The dance was held in the largest barn in Pico's, decorated with lanterns and ribbons. Music from a fiddle, guitar, and harmonica spilled out into the street, along with laughter and the sound of many voices. Nora felt a flutter of nervousness as they entered. She had not been around this many people since she left town weeks ago. Several people greeted Seth, clearly pleased to see him out socializing for once. The men clapped him on the back and the women smiled warmly, their eyes curious as they took in Nora beside him. "Seth Randall, I heard you hired yourself some help," an older woman said, her sharp eyes assessing Nora with interest. About time, too. That ranch was too much for one man. Mrs. Patterson, this is Nora Garrett. She has been a godsend, truth be told. Seth's hand rested lightly on Nora's back, a gesture that felt protective and proprietary in a way that made her pulse quicken. Pleased to meet you, madam, Nora said politely. Garrett, any relation to Thomas Garrett who had that homestead outside town? He was my father. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with sympathy. I was sorry to hear of his passing. He was a good man. Sounds like you have landed in a good situation, though. Seth here is one of the finest young men in these parts, even if he is too stubborn to come to town more than once in a blue moon. As the evening progressed, Nora was introduced to what seemed like half the population of Pecos. People were friendly, welcoming her without the judgment she had feared. Several women made a point of telling her they were glad Seth had found good help, that he needed someone looking after him. When the dancing started in earnest, Seth surprised her by asking her to dance. I am not very good at this, he warned as he led her onto the floor. Neither am I, Nora admitted, but she took his offered hand anyway. He was better than he claimed, or perhaps they simply moved well together. His hand was warm on her waist, and she could feel the strength in his arms as he guided her through the steps. They danced close in the crowded space, and Nora found herself looking up into his face, seeing something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I am glad you came to my ranch that day, Seth said quietly, his voice nearly lost in the music. So am I, Nora replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. They danced several more dances, and Nora danced with a few other men who asked politely, but her eyes kept finding Seth across the room. He stood with a group of ranchers, discussing cattle and weather and prices, but she noticed his gaze following her as well. On the ride home, with the stars bright overhead and the night air cool on her flushed cheeks, Nora felt something shifting between them. The easy companionship was still there, but underlaid now with an awareness that could not be ignored. Thank you for taking me tonight, she said as they neared the ranch. I had a wonderful time. We can go again next time they have one, Seth offered. If you would like. I would like that very much. At the house, Seth helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. They stood there in the moonlight, and Nora thought he might kiss her. She realized she wanted him to, propriety be damned, but Seth stepped back, clearing his throat. Good night, Nora. Good night, she echoed, trying not to feel disappointed as she went inside. The seasons began to shift as September arrived. The brutal heat of summer eased into warm days and cool nights. Nora and Seth continued their dance around each other, the attraction building with every shared meal, every accidental touch, every moment their eyes met across a room. One afternoon, Nora was in the garden harvesting the last of the summer vegetables when she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. She dropped her basket and ran, her heart pounding with fear. She found Seth in one of the corrals, facing down a horse that was clearly in distress. The animal, a young stallion, had gotten tangled in loose barbed wire that must have come down from a fence, and in its panic was making things worse. Stay back, Seth ordered when he saw Nora. He is scared and hurt. He could lash out at anything. But Nora could see the blood on the horse's legs, could hear the terror in its whinnying. She also saw that Seth was trying to approach from the front, where those powerful hooves could strike him. Wait, she called. Let me try something. Before Seth could stop her, she was climbing through the fence rails, moving slowly and carefully. She began to sing, the same song her father had used to calm frightened animals, her voice low and soothing. The horse's ears swiveled toward her, its rolling eyes fixing on this new presence. Nora kept singing, kept moving slowly closer, her hands outstretched and unthreatening. Behind the horse, Seth took advantage of the distraction to move into position with wire cutters he had grabbed from his belt. "Keep doing what you are doing," he said quietly, and Nora continued to sing, continued to move closer until she could touch the horse's neck, feeling its trembling beneath her palm. Seth worked quickly, cutting away the wire that had tangled around the horse's legs. The moment the animal was free, it could have bolted, could have kicked out and hurt them both. Instead, it stood still under Nora's gentle hands and voice, only dancing sideways a few steps before settling. "Easy now, you are all right, you are safe," Nora murmured, examining the cuts on its legs. "Seth, we need to clean these wounds." Together they led the horse to the barn, and Nora held its head while Seth cleaned and wrapped the injuries. When it was done and the horse was safely in a stall with fresh water and hay, Seth turned to Nora with an expression she could not quite read. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish," he said. "You could have been killed. But I was not. The horse just needed someone to be calm." Nora wiped her dusty hands on her apron. "Where did you learn to do that? To calm an animal like that, my father?" "He had a gift with frightened creatures. He used to say that fear makes more noise than reason, so you have to be quieter and steadier than the fear." She looked up at Seth, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the dim barn. "I could not just stand there and watch you risk yourself alone." "Nora," Seth said her name like a prayer, and then his hands were cupping her face and his lips were on hers, kissing her with a hunger that stole her breath. She kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, pressing closer to his solid warmth. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, filled with all the longing that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seth rested his forehead against hers. "I have been trying so hard not to do that." "Why?" Nora asked, her fingers threading through the hair at the nape of his neck. "Because you work for me." "Because I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated. Because I knew once I kissed you, I would not want to stop." His thumbs stroked her cheekbones tenderly. "I do not feel pressured. I feel like I have been waiting for this since the first week I was here." Nora pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Seth, I care for you, more than I should maybe, but I cannot help it." "More than you should," Seth laughed, the sound joyful and relieved. "Nora, I am half in love with you already, maybe more than half. I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I come in from work early just to spend more time in your company. I lie awake at night thinking about you just down the hall. If you think you care for me more than you should, then we are both in trouble." "Then we are in trouble together," Nora said and kissed him again. From that day forward, everything changed and nothing changed. They still worked their respective duties, still shared meals and conversation. But now Seth would steal kisses when he came in from the fields, and Nora would find reasons to touch his hand when she served him dinner. They talked late into the evenings about everything and nothing, learning each other's dreams and fears and hopes. "I want to build this ranch up," Seth told her one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "Not to be rich, but to be secure. To know that drought or hard winter would not wipe me out. To have something solid to pass on someday." "Pass on to who?" Nora asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Children, if I am blessed to have them. A family." He looked down at her, his eyes serious. "Nora, I know we have not been courting long in the traditional sense, but I also know my own heart. I love you. I want you to be my wife, not my employee. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you on this land." Nora's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking if you would consider it. I know I am not the best catch. The ranch is small. Money is tight sometimes, and this life is not easy. But I would spend every day trying to make you happy. I would work my fingers to the bone to provide for you, and I would love you with everything in me for as long as I draw breath." "Seth Randall," Nora said, turning to face him fully, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You are the best man I have ever known. You gave me hope when I had none, a home when I was lost, and you have made me happier these past months than I knew was possible. I do not need wealth or an easy life. I need you. So yes, I will marry you, and I will count myself the most fortunate woman in Texas." Seth kissed her then, deep and tender, and when they finally parted he was smiling in a way she had never seen before, open and joyful and young. They were married in Pecos 6 weeks later, in early November when the worst of the work was done and they could spare a day away from the ranch. It was a small ceremony in the church, with Mrs. Patterson and several of the ranchers who had become friends standing as witnesses. Nora wore a dress she had sewn from the sage green fabric Seth had bought her, and she carried wildflowers that still bloomed despite the season. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Seth kissed her in front of God and their small community, Nora felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. She had come to Seth's ranch desperate and alone, looking for nothing more than work to survive. She had found instead a home, a partner, and a love deeper than she had dared to dream. The wedding night was tender and sweet, with Seth showing a gentleness and patience that made Nora fall even more deeply in love with him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, now their bed, and talked until the early hours of the morning. "I am going to build you a proper house," Seth promised, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Something bigger, with a real bedroom and maybe a room for sewing and a porch that wraps all the way around." "I like this house," Nora said contentedly. "It was your parents' home, your home. It has good bones and good memories. Then we will make it better, add on to it, whatever you want." He kissed the top of her head. "I just want you, and this life we are building. That is enough for me." The first year of their marriage passed in a blend of hard work and deep happiness. They worked side by side expanding the ranch, their partnership in life extending to partnership in labor. Nora proved herself capable of far more than cooking and cleaning, helping with the cattle during brandings and roundups, her skill with animals becoming widely known. Seth was true to his word about expanding the house. That spring, he began building an addition, a proper bedroom and a small parlor, working on it in the evenings and on Sundays after church. Nora helped when she could, learning to hammer nails straight and measure boards, laughing when she hit her thumb and accepting Seth's teasing kisses as medicine. In the summer of 1885, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Seth one evening at dinner, simply and without fanfare, and watched his face transform with wonder. "Are you certain?" he asked, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. "As certain as I can be. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been feeling poorly in the mornings." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby." Seth buried his face against her stomach, and she felt his shoulders shake. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I am going to be a father," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Nora assured him, running her fingers through his hair. The pregnancy progressed well, though Nora found the heat of the summer particularly trying. Seth became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, much to her amusement and occasional frustration. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from carrying water to the garden. "I just do not want anything to happen to you or the baby," Seth said, taking the bucket from her hands anyway. "Nothing will happen. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work. But she was touched by his concern, by the tender way he would rest his hand on her growing belly at night, talking softly to their unborn child. Their son was born in early March of 1886, arriving during a late winter storm that kept the doctor from Pecos from reaching them. Mrs. Patterson came instead, delivering the baby with capable hands while Seth paced outside the bedroom door, terrified by every cry of pain he heard from Nora. When Mrs. Patterson finally emerged and told him he had a healthy son and his wife was well, Seth nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the bedroom to find Nora exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly, and Seth approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face of his child with absolute wonder. "He is perfect," Seth breathed. "You are perfect. I cannot believe we made this." They named him Samuel Thomas after both their brothers, though they called him Sam from the start. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Nora recovered quickly from the birth. Seth proved to be exactly the father she knew he would be, patient and gentle with his son, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Nora for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, singing to Sam in his deep voice when the baby fussed. "I never knew you could sing," Nora said one evening, listening to Seth croon a lullaby to their son. "I cannot, not really, but he does not seem to mind," Seth replied, looking down at Sam with such love that Nora's heart ached with happiness. The ranch continued to prosper. Seth's careful management and Nora's hard work paid off in increasing herd sizes and better grazing land. They hired a young man named Jake to help with the heavier work, giving Seth more time to spend with his family. Sam grew quickly, a bright-eyed toddler who followed his father everywhere, trying to copy Seth's long strides with his short legs. Nora would watch them from the kitchen window, Seth's patience as he showed Sam how to feed the chickens or groom a horse, and feel such profound gratitude for the life they had built. In the spring of 1888, their daughter was born, arriving more easily than Sam had, as if she could not wait to join the world. They named her Grace Margaret, after both their mothers. She had Nora's green eyes and Seth's dark hair, and from the beginning she was a calm, observant baby who seemed to take everything in with quiet intelligence. "Now we have one of each," Seth said, holding Grace while Sam climbed on the bed to see his new sister. "Our family is complete, is it?" Nora asked with a smile. "Well, maybe not completely complete," Seth amended, grinning at her. "We can keep working on that." Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and years. The children grew, the ranch expanded, and Seth and Nora's love deepened into something rich and enduring. They had their share of challenges, years when drought reduced the herd, winters when blizzards tested their resources, the constant demands of raising children and maintaining a homestead. But through it all, they faced everything together, partners in every sense. Seth never made a major decision about the ranch without consulting Nora, valuing her opinion and judgment. Nora continued to work the ranch alongside him, her capability with animals and her head for numbers making her invaluable. Sam grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did, already talking at 5 years old about how he would run it when he grew up. Grace was quieter, more contemplative, but she had her mother's gift with growing things, and the garden flourished under her tiny helping hands. In the summer of 1890, Nora discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise as they had assumed their family was complete. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and by the time their second daughter arrived in early 1891, both Nora and Seth were exhausted, but relieved that mother and baby were healthy. They named this one Rose Elizabeth, and she was a firecracker from the start, crying lustily and demanding attention. Sam was now 5 and took his role as big brother seriously, protective of both his sisters. Grace, at 3, was fascinated by the new baby, always wanting to help feed and hold her. 3 children, Seth said one night, watching his family around the dinner table. Sam was telling a long, involved story about a frog he had found by the creek. Grace was attempting to feed herself with more enthusiasm than success, and baby Rose was sleeping in the cradle Seth had built and used for all 3 children. When did we become such a large family? When we stopped being 2 lonely people and became partners, Nora said, reaching across the table to take his hand. I look at our children and I see the best of both of us. I look at this ranch and I see everything we have built together. I look at you and I still see the man who took a chance on a desperate woman looking for work, who said he could use the company. Best decision I ever made, Seth said, raising her hand to his lips. You brought life to this place, Nora, not just our children, but laughter and warmth and hope. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me live again. We saved each other, Nora said simply. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Sam grew tall and strong, learning everything Seth could teach him about ranching. Grace developed a talent for drawing, filling pages with sketches of the ranch, the animals, her family. Rose was the wild child, always climbing trees and racing the dogs, giving her parents gray hairs with her fearless antics. Seth and Nora grew older together, their faces lined by sun and wind and laughter. They added more onto the house as the children grew, building a real second story with bedrooms for each child. The ranch expanded to 3 times its original size, successful enough that they could afford to hire more help and take occasional trips to visit Samuel in California, though Seth never wanted to stay away from home for long. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Seth took Nora back to Pico's for a dance, just like that first night so long ago. They were older now, with responsibilities and children waiting at home with Mrs. Patterson, but when Seth took her in his arms on the dance floor, Nora felt like that young woman again, seeing possibility in a cowboy's blue eyes. You ever regret it? Seth asked as they swayed to the music. Tying yourself to a rancher this hard life? Never, Nora said fiercely. Not for one single moment. This life, these children, it is everything I never knew I wanted. That day I rode up to your ranch, I was looking for work, for survival. I found my home, my purpose, my heart. How could I ever regret that? Seth kissed her there on the dance floor, not caring who saw, pouring 10 years of love and devotion into that kiss. When they pulled apart, both their eyes were bright with tears of happiness. I love you, Nora Randall. I love you, Seth. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days after. They danced until the music stopped, then rode home under the stars, just as they had so many years ago. But this time, they were returning to a house full of children, a ranch that thrived, a life built together from nothing but hard work and enduring love. As they stood on their porch, looking out over the land that had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, their family, Seth wrapped his arms around Nora from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. When I told you I could use the company that first day, I had no idea how much I needed you, he said quietly. Neither did I, Nora admitted, leaning back against his solid strength. But I am so grateful I was brave enough to ask for work, and you were kind enough to give it to me. The children's laughter drifted out from inside the house, where Mrs. Patterson was likely losing the battle to get them into bed. A horse whinnied in the corral, and the wind carried the scent of sage and prairie grass. The ranch settled in for the night, a living testament to what two people could build when they chose to face life together. Years continued to unfold, bringing more grandeur and challenge in equal measure. By 1895, Sam was 14 and doing the work of a grown man, his shoulders broadening and his voice deepening. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind, and ranchers from neighboring properties were already joking about arranging marriages with their daughters. Grace, at 12, had lost none of her quiet observation of the world. She helped her mother with the household tasks, but her true passion lay in her art and in the small schoolhouse that had opened in Pecos 5 years prior. She rode there 3 times a week when weather permitted, soaking up knowledge like the earth soaked up rain. Seth and Nora encouraged her education, knowing that intelligence and learning were gifts to be nurtured. Rose, at 10, remained their wild spirit. She could ride like she had been born on horseback, and more than once Nora's heart had been in her throat watching her youngest daughter race across the pastures, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner. But Rose also had a tender heart, always bringing home injured animals to nurse, crying over every calf that did not make it through a hard birth. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the region, but success brought its own complications. In the fall of 1895, a man named Crawford, who owned a much larger spread to the north, approached Seth about buying his land. The offer was generous, more money than Seth had ever imagined having at once. That night at dinner, he told Nora about it, and the children listened with wide eyes as their parents discussed the possibility of selling, of moving, of starting fresh somewhere else. "We could move to a city," Seth said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Give the children opportunities we cannot provide here. Grace could go to a real school, study art properly. We would not have to worry about droughts or hard winters anymore." "Do you want to sell?" Nora asked quietly, her eyes searching his face. Seth looked around the table at his family, then out the window at the land he had been born on, the land he had worked his entire life. "No," he admitted, "I do not. This is our home. Your father built this house with his own hands. We expanded it for our children. Every fence post, every building, every tree we planted, it is all ours. It is our story written in wood and stone and sweat." "Then do not sell," Nora said simply. "Money is not worth losing your soul, and this land is in your soul, Seth. It is in our children's souls too. Look at Sam, he already plans his future here. Rose cannot imagine being anywhere she cannot ride free, and Grace, even with her love of learning, draws this place over and over because it is home." "What about you?" Seth asked. "Do you want to stay?" Nora reached across the table and took his hand, worn and calloused from years of work. The hand that had steadied her down from a wagon on their wedding day, that had held their newborn children, that reached for hers every night before they slept. "I came to this ranch looking for work, and you said you could use the company. I found so much more than employment. I found my place in this world. Our children were born here. Our love grew here. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" Seth's eyes grew bright, and he squeezed her hand. "Then we stay. We tell Crawford thanks, but no thanks." "We stay," Nora confirmed, and around the table their children cheered. Seth turned down Crawford's offer the next week, and life continued its steady rhythm. But that conversation stayed with Nora, the reminder that the life they had built was precious precisely because they had built it themselves, from nothing, with love and labor and commitment to each other. The children continued to grow and change. Sam, at 16, was already a better horseman than most grown men, and he had inherited his mother's way with animals. He could calm a spooked horse with a touch and a word, and he had a gift for knowing when a cow was going to have trouble birthing before any outward signs showed. Grace surprised them all by falling in love with teaching. After finishing her own education at the Picos school, she began helping the schoolteacher with the younger children, discovering that she loved sharing knowledge as much as she loved acquiring it. The schoolteacher, an older woman named Miss Hardy, took Grace under her wing, training her to eventually take over when Miss Hardy retired. Rose, at 14, remained their handful. She had suitors already, much to Seth's dismay and Nora's amusement, but she showed no interest in settling down. She wanted to travel, to see things beyond the ranch and Picos, though she always insisted she would come back home eventually. In the spring of 1899, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in the barn during a dry spell. Seth and Sam fought the blaze desperately, managing to get all the animals out but unable to save the structure. As they stood watching the barn burn, years of work and equipment going up in smoke, Nora came to stand beside her husband. "We will rebuild," she said firmly, taking his hand. Seth looked at her, his face smudged with soot, his eyes red from smoke and exhaustion. "That barn was 40 years old. My father built it. And we will build a new one, bigger and better. We will make new memories." Nora squeezed his hand. "We have faced droughts, blizzards, sickness, and hard times before. We will face this too together." And they did. The whole community came together for a barn raising, ranchers and townspeople alike showing up with lumber and tools and helping hands. In 3 weeks, a new barn stood where the old one had been, and Seth stood looking at it with humility and gratitude. "I spent so many years alone, thinking I did not need anyone," he told Nora that night as they lay in bed. "I was so wrong. Community matters. Family matters. And you matter most of all. You taught me that." "We taught each other," Nora corrected. "You taught me that I was stronger than I knew, that I could do more than I believed possible. We have built a good life, Seth, and one barn fire cannot take that away from us." The new century arrived with celebration in Picos. There was a dance and fireworks, and Seth and Nora attended with their children, now practically grown. Sam was 19, a man by any measure. Grace was 17, engaged to the new schoolteacher who had come to replace Miss Hardy. A gentle young man named Matthew Harrington, who loved her quiet intelligence and artistic soul. Rose was 15, beautiful and wild and not yet ready to settle, much to the disappointment of several young ranchers' sons. As the century turned from 1899 to 1900, Seth pulled Nora close and kissed her, just as he had kissed her on their wedding day, on the birth of each child, on every anniversary, and on countless ordinary days in between. "To the new century," he said. "May it be half as good to us as the last one was." "To us," Nora replied. "To our family, our home, and to the day I came looking for work and you said you could use the company." Seth laughed, that deep, warm laugh she had come to treasure over 16 years of marriage. "Best use of words I ever managed." The years of the new century brought their own changes. Grace married Matthew in the summer of 1900, and they built a small house in Picos near the school where they both taught. She visited the ranch every Sunday for dinner, and within a year, Nora and Seth became grandparents to a tiny girl with Grace's green eyes and Matthew's gentle demeanor. Sam married in 1902 to the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a practical young woman named Catherine who took to ranch life like she had been born to it. They lived in a cabin Seth and Sam built on the far end of the property, and when their son was born in 1903, Seth Randall Jr., Seth Sr. walked around grinning for a week straight. "A grandson named after me," he told Nora, holding the baby with the same tender care he had shown his own children. "I never thought I would see this day." "You are only 47, Nora laughed. "You will see many more days, God willing. Many more grandchildren too, I expect. She was right. Sam and Catherine went on to have 4 children. Grace and Matthew had 3. Even Rose eventually settled down, though not until she was 23 and had traveled to Santa Fe and back, working for a time at a hotel and seeing more of the world than most women of her generation. She married a ranch hand from Wyoming who had drifted through looking for work. A quiet man named Jack who could match her wild spirit and keep up with her restless energy. By 1910, Seth and Nora were in their 50s, grandparents many times over, and their house was constantly full of children and laughter. The ranch had been divided into sections, with Sam managing most of the daily operations now that Seth's knees were not what they once were. But Seth still rode out most days, still checked the fences and the cattle, still could not quite let go of the land that was so much a part of him. Nora's hair had gone silver, braided and pinned up in the same style she had worn as a young woman. Her hands were gnarled from years of work, but they were still steady as she kneaded bread or held a grandchild. She had earned every line on her face, every silver hair, and she wore them with pride. One evening in late summer, after the grandchildren had been collected by their parents and the house was quiet again, Seth and Nora sat on their porch as they had done countless times over 25 years of marriage. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the land stretched out before them in peaceful beauty. "You remember the day we met?" Seth asked, taking her hand in his. "Every detail," Nora replied. "I was so scared, so desperate. I had been ready to give up, to accept that I would end up alone and destitute. And then there you were, this serious man with kind eyes, saying you could use the company. I remember thinking you were too thin, too tired, and far too proud to admit how much trouble you were in," Seth said. "I remember thinking I should send you away, that hiring a woman would just complicate my life. And then I looked at you, really looked, and I saw strength and determination, and something I could not name at the time but now I know was the other half of my soul." Nora turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved my life that day." "We saved each other," Seth corrected, echoing the words she had spoken so many years before. "You brought light and life and love to a lonely ranch and a lonelier man. You gave me children, grandchildren, a home instead of just a house. Everything good in my life came from the day I decided I could use the company. I love you, Seth Randall. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for however many more years God gives us. I love you, Nora. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They sat together as the sun set completely and the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. In the corral, horses settled in for the night. The land breathed around them, alive and enduring, witness to their love story that had begun with a simple need for work and a cowboy who needed company. Years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that are part of any long life. They lost friends to age and illness, celebrated weddings and births, weathered economic downturns and natural disasters. Through it all, Seth and Nora remained each other's constant, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1915, as they approached their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. The ranch was filled with people, with grandchildren running everywhere, with tables loaded with food, with music and laughter. Seth and Nora stood in the center of it all, their hands clasped, looking at the family they had created and the community they had become part of. 30 years, Seth marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. "I know exactly what you mean," Nora said, leaning into his side. "I look at our grandchildren, and I cannot believe how much time has passed. But when I look at you, I still see the man who gave me hope when I had none." That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone again, Seth gave Nora a gift he had been working on for months. It was a book, hand-bound, filled with photographs and written memories of their life together. On the first page, in Seth's careful handwriting, were the words, "She came to the ranch looking for work. I said I could use the company. We found forever." Nora cried as she turned the pages, seeing their story documented in images and words. Their wedding day, young and hopeful. The children as babies, as children, as adults. The ranch through the seasons and years. Their life preserved and treasured. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," she said through her tears. "It is our story," Seth replied. "And it is not finished yet. We still have more pages to fill." And they did. They lived to see their children succeed and prosper, to hold great-grandchildren in their arms, to celebrate their 40th, and then their 45th wedding anniversary. The ranch passed primarily to Sam's management, though Seth remained involved in an advisory capacity until his body simply would not cooperate anymore. In the spring of 1925, at the age of 70, Seth finally admitted he needed to slow down. His heart was not as strong as it once was, and the doctor from Pico's had warned him to take it easy. Nora, at 65, still moved with purpose and energy, but she too felt the weight of years. They spent more time on the porch now, watching the life of the ranch flow around them. Sam ran things with efficiency and love, teaching his own sons the lessons Seth had taught him. The great-grandchildren would come to visit, climbing on their knees and begging for stories about the old days. "Tell us about when Grandma came to the ranch," they would beg. And Seth would tell the story once more, never tiring of it, his eyes always finding Nora's as he spoke. One evening in late September, with autumn coloring the world in gold and russet, Seth and Nora sat together on their porch as the sun set. Seth's breathing had been labored lately, and Nora knew with a cold certainty that their time together was growing short. She had pushed the thought away for weeks, but tonight she could not deny it. "Nora," Seth said quietly, his hand finding hers, "I need you to know something." "Hush," she said, fighting back tears. "Save your strength. No, I need you to hear this." He turned to her, his blue eyes still bright despite his age and illness. "These 40 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. If I could go back and live it all again, I would not change a single moment. You made my life complete." "Seth, please do not talk like you are saying goodbye." "I am not going anywhere tonight," he assured her with a faint smile. "But when I do, eventually, I need you to keep living, keep filling those pages. Watch our grandchildren grow, spoil the great-grandchildren, laugh with our children. Live, Nora, live the life we built together." "I cannot imagine this life without you in it," Nora whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You are strong, my love. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You will grieve, and that is right and good. But then you will get up and you will keep going because that is who you are. That is what you do." Seth lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Promise me." "I promise," Nora said, though the words felt like broken glass in her throat. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge. Finally, Seth spoke again. "Do you remember what you said to me once about your father and calming frightened animals? That fear makes more noise than reason, so you have to be quieter and steadier than the fear," Nora recited. "You have been my steady, Nora. In every storm, every challenge, every moment of doubt, you were my steady, and I hope in some small way I was yours." "You were," Nora assured him. "You have always been my steady from that very first day." Seth passed away peacefully 3 weeks later in his sleep with Nora beside him. The whole community mourned the loss of a good man, a fair rancher, a devoted husband and father. His funeral was attended by more people than Nora could count, all with stories of Seth's kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. Nora grieved deeply, as Seth had known she would. There were days when she could not get out of bed, when the weight of his absence was too much to bear. But she had promised him she would live, and Nora Randall had always been a woman of her word. She remained on the ranch, supported by her children and grandchildren, finding purpose in watching the family grow and thrive. Sam ran the ranch with the same care his father had, and Nora took comfort in seeing Seth's legacy continue. She spent time with each of her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom and love. On what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, Nora sat on the porch alone, holding the book Seth had given her 15 years earlier. She had added to it over the years, documenting the rest of their story, and now she carefully wrote the final entry. 50 years ago today, I became your wife. 41 years we were given together, and I am grateful for every single day. You kept your promise to love me with everything in you for as long as you drew breath. You worked your fingers to the bone to provide for our family. You made me happy every single day. I came to your ranch looking for work, and you said you could use the company. We built a life, a family, a love that will endure long after we are both gone. Until we meet again, my love. Your Nora. She closed the book and looked out at the land that had been the backdrop for their love story. The ranch was thriving under Sam's care, just as Seth would have wanted. Their children were happy and successful. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried their legacy forward. It was enough. It was more than enough. Nora lived for another 5 years, dying peacefully at the age of 75, surrounded by family. She was buried beside Seth on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree they had planted together on their 10th wedding anniversary. At her funeral, Sam stood and told the story one last time, the story his children and grandchildren all knew by heart. My mother came to this ranch looking for work. My father said he could use the company. And they built something beautiful, something lasting, something that lives on in all of us. That is what real love does. It endures. It grows. It creates ripples that spread out forever. The ranch continued to be run by their descendants for generations. The house was expanded again and again, but the original rooms that Seth's father had built, that Seth and Nora had lived in when they first married, were always preserved, a testament to where it all began. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Texas plains, if you listened carefully, you might almost hear the echo of laughter, of conversation, of a man and a woman who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that outlasted time itself. Their story became legend in Pecos, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest of needs and the smallest of gestures. A woman looking for work and a lonely cowboy who said he could use the company. From such humble beginnings, they built an empire of love, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that would never be forgotten. The ranch still stands today, over a century later, still owned by their descendants, still bearing the mark of the love that founded it. And in the family Bible, preserved carefully through the years, is an inscription in Seth's handwriting and Nora's, written together on their 25th anniversary. We came together as strangers in need. We became partners in work. We transformed into lovers in heart. We remain bound in soul. This is our testament. Love is built in the ordinary moments, strengthened through shared struggles, and perfected through commitment. May our descendants always remember that the greatest wealth is not measured in land or cattle, but in the love we share with those who journey beside us. Their love story, begun in desperation and answered with kindness, proved that sometimes the most profound connections come from the simplest of beginnings, and that a life built on mutual respect, shared labor, and enduring devotion is the truest form of success any person can achieve.